This is Truth Be Told.
That not only are there reptilians here,
new evidence of UFO fleets.
We were close to nuclear war.
To help you transform so that you can live your highest truth.
We're not being told just because we're not ready for it.
Geostations of frequency, vibrational.
I was a homicide detective with LAPD.
UFOs increase. Visitations. You know, I'm 52 years old, and in my lifetime, I've heard about Charles Manson, Jim Jones, Marshall Applewhite, David Koresh, and what do they have in common? They're all cult leaders. Well, it may surprise you, but that's just a few names. And today, we're going to find out how many cults are out there, or religions, or organizations that, or even politicians that are on the verge of the definition of what a cult is. Today, we have author, occult deprogrammer, occult specialist, and executive director of a nonprofit organization called Cult Education Institute. Rick Allan Ross is with us to talk about cults inside and out. In fact, that's the title of his book, How People Get In and How Do They Get Out. Some can say goodbye easy, and sometimes they don't want you to leave. This is going to be a great show, and I hope you have amazing questions. For our guest today, Rick Allan Ross, I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios, author, cult deprogrammer, Rick Allan Ross.
Hi, Tony.
Hey, Rick. How are you?
Pretty good.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I'm glad you're here because this is one of those topics that, we don't have to deal with on a daily basis. At least some of us don't, but they're out there. This topic is out there that, we hear once in a while in the news, Scientology, and every so often these people show up in the news like the Charles Mansons and David Koresh, but it usually becomes a tragic a tragic event that brings it to the news. So we don't really get to hear about it. So I'm curious, and I know a lot of people that are tuning in today are going to be curious about, how in the heck did you get started? I mean, did you grow up in a cult or something? Or
No, I didn't. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, within a very nice Jewish family, and I had a grandmother who came from Europe, and she spoke Yiddish as her first language, which is a German dialect. And in 1982, she was in a nursing home in Phoenix, and I went to take her out to lunch. And when I got there, she was a mess. She was very upset. And when I asked her, why are you upset? What's bothering you? She told me that this woman had accosted her in the nursing home, was preaching to her, trying to convert her to a particular belief system. And I said to her, how in the heck did she get in here? And my grandmother told me she works here. Oh, my God. And at that point, quite frankly, I was pretty angry. I went to the director of the nursing home. I said, what's going on here? This is a place for Jewish elderly people, and my grandmother should be left alone unless she requests for someone to come visit her and share their faith with her, which I would have no objection to. So anyway, one thing led to another. And they investigated the nursing home and found that there were 5 members of the paid staff that had covertly gotten jobs there with the purpose of targeting the elderly for their group. And this group was operating in Phoenix. They had acquired real estate through bequests and elderly people's wills and so forth. I don't know what they hoped to gain from my grandmother. Right. She was not persuaded. But that led me to be on a committee, and then one committee led to another committee and another committee. And I found myself as an anti-cult activist and community organizer. And then I worked on the staff of a social service agency in Phoenix, and later became a cult deprogrammer. And how that started was people would just families would bring their loved ones to our offices, and I and our clinical psychologists would sit and talk with these people who were in a just all types of groups, political cults, therapy cults, religious cults,
Right.
etc. And I began to be known as someone that did these interventions. And by the end of the 80s, I was a full-time interventionist, doing interventions across the United States, and then later internationally around the world. To date, I've done over 500 interventions.
Wow.
As recently as this past week and past month, I've done 2. So I continue to do that. I also act as a court expert witness regarding destructive authoritarian groups. I have been qualified and accepted in 11 states, including United States Federal Court. And your audience is probably aware of Keith Raniere, the leader of the cult known as NXIVM, that
Right.
branded women. Raniere is now doing 120 years in federal prison. I testified against Raniere and assisted the prosecution in that case. And so I have been doing this work now for 40 years. And it's brought me joy. And at times it's made me feel fearful for my life.
I would say so.
I've been under the protection of the FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, Homeland Security, and this is because of threats on my life. You mentioned Scientology. Scientology has periodically hired private investigators to have me under surveillance, to stalk me. And Keith Raniere hired a private investigator that actually went through my garbage. And later I found out had illegally penetrated my banking and my phone records.
Oh my God, how did they do that?
And you know, that's the kind of life I've led, where at times, I guess it's a compliment that groups have sued me, harassed me, stalked me, surveilled me because of my work.
Well, it kind of validates what you're doing and validates what you're saying against them. Because the old saying is, if you're not doing anything wrong, then what are you trying to hide? So that's interesting. And I was just looking. I mean, I'm sure you've done the research. It said, how long have cult been a thing? I'm assuming they've been around way longer than this, but it says beginning in the 1930s. Cults began the objective sociological studies. Well, that's the beginning of studies. But I'm sure they've been going back.
They have been around since the mystery cults in the Roman Empire, ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia. I mean, there have always been cults, which I would define by 3 core elements that all definitions intersect on. I'd call it the nucleus for a definition of a destructive cult. And those 3 elements are: number 1, you have an all-powerful authoritarian leader who has total control, no meaningful accountability. Whatever the leader says is right, whatever the leader says is wrong, and the leader becomes the defining element and driving force of the group and an object of worship. Second, the group leader and the group use identifiable techniques of coercive persuasion and thought reform to gain undue influence over the people involved. And number 3, if we're going to call this group a destructive cult rather than let's say a benign one, which such groups do exist, the group does harm. And this varies by degree, Tony, from group to group. So it could be a group that just rips you off for whatever money they can take from you. They exploit you for free labor, or it could escalate to the kind of criminal activity that you've mentioned regarding Charles Manson, the Tate LaBianca murders, David Koresh, the Waco Davidian standoff, where for 51 days after killing federal agents, he took a a position that he would not come out of this compound outside of Waco. And in the end, he incinerated the entire compound and killed all of his followers, including many children. Many of those children were actually his. And then, of course, Marshall Applewhite, who led a very small group that no one even knew about. The police didn't know about it. No one knew about it except if families that were directly affected, and they had no idea where he was. And he was holed up in a rented mansion between San Diego and LA with 38 followers, all of whom they found dead in 1995 in this mansion at the behest of Marshall Applewhite, who was in and out of mental institutions, and who told them that if they ingested a mix of pudding and vodka and phenobarbital and allowed themselves to be suffocated while they were in their sleep, they would be elevated to a kingdom higher than heaven in the cosmos with him, who they regarded as their teacher. He called them his class. And so they all committed suicide. But in their minds, which were so altered by his influence, they believed that they were actually going to something better. He said, we will shed our human containers, basically denigrating them as individuals to nothing more than that, containers. And so again and again, we've heard these tragedies because some of these groups remain obscure until something horrible happens. And then suddenly we go, whoa, where did this group come from?
Well, I mean, I understand, back in Romans, Greeks, and even throughout the ages, but in the last maybe 40 years, we've heard about this so many times of these men, mostly men. I mean, there may be women leaders out there that have started,
there are,
but you mostly hear men that come to this point where people start following them as almost like a godlike or some type of leader. And it's hard to believe in this day and age that people still fall for it. So working with a lot of psychologists and working with a lot of people with interventions, how do people start believing these men in 2022 when you have internet and you've seen over the years that all these men failed and they're taking them to another realm and the world opened up and became a paradise? Why do you think people still fall for these type of people, these type of men?
Well, Tony, I think the human mind is really very fragile.
Right.
And that's my experience over the past decades. And anybody can be had. I mean, basically, a cult leader is a con man. The only difference between a typical con man or grifter and a cult leader, in my mind, is that a con man takes the money and skips town.
Right.
And a cult leader runs the same con on the same people indefinitely. And I would say people are tricked and trapped into destructive cults. The only common narrative I could give you would be that we're more vulnerable when we're not happy than when we are happy. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. and also you would say, I'm not interested in your group. I'm happy. I'm happy with my life the way it is. I don't need your solutions, your philosophy, because I'm okay. But when people are not happy, and we all go through bad patches, you are more vulnerable than when you are. So at that moment, it could be your bad luck that somebody comes up to you and they say, and it could be someone you know, could be a relative, it could be a family member, it could be a coworker or somebody you'd like to know better who seems attractive and you feel drawn to them. And they say, hey, I have this fantastic seminar that I've gone to that I think if you went to it, it's a self-help kind of seminar, and it will just change your life. It's wonderful.
Hear it all the time.
Or my church is having a social, and we're going to have all kinds of events. We're going to have singing. We're going to play volleyball. We're gonna swim in the pool that the church has. And you think, well, it's a church. How could it be bad?
Right.
It must be okay. Or it could be someone who says, hey, I'm going to this meditation group or this yoga group or whatever. And you think it's benign. And so it's kind of like a bait and switch con. What you think that you're getting, that they put on the hook to get you in through the door, is not what is behind the door. But you're not going to find that out until you're more immersed and your mind is more marinated with the particular brand of Kool-Aid that they're serving. And so that is the process, and it's nuanced. It's step by step. It oozes into the cracks of what you are vulnerable to. Mm-hmm. And it's like a kind of a series of baby steps or spoon feeding, and you don't really see it. It's taking you in, but you cannot see it. And so I've worked with 5 medical doctors who were totally brainwashed. I mean, one was an orthopedic surgeon, wow. Another was an anesthesiologist, and a young woman I just worked with not long ago, a few days ago, and she was a graduate of Harvard. And I've worked with a number of people, young people who graduated from Cornell, from Dartmouth, from Penn. I worked with one man that had an MBA from Wharton and was very successful. So if you think that you're too smart to get pulled into and conned by a cult, well, that's an arrogant, presumptuous way to look at it, in my opinion. And you're better off to think, you know what, they could get me. And so because I think they could, I'm going to be a little bit more wary. I'm going to be a little bit more on guard when somebody approaches me. And I would say, Tony, that there have always been a lot of cults around.
Oh, yeah.
But we see them more now because of social media. Right. And because of the internet and the quick access we have and the way the news cycles work, around the clock. So it's more evident than it once was, but I think it was always there because many of these groups are less than 100 people, and they're just everywhere and anywhere.
It's like the Westboro Church in Kansas. Very few people, but they sure make a loud noise. And they, maybe not so much now because I think, was it Phelps?
Fred Phelps died. And when a cult leader dies, Tony, it's kind of like a wheel when the hub is missing.
Right.
And the members are like the spokes of the wheel or the outer rim, and they're just falling apart. So once Fred Phelps died, that group began to disintegrate, which I would regard the Westboro Baptist Church as what I would call a family cult.
Right, because it was mostly family, yeah.
Yeah, it was mostly members of the Phelps family and the grandchildren and so forth, some of whom have escaped and moved on with their lives. In my book, Cults Inside Out, I have a chapter on family cults, and I really get into explaining the dynamic and some of the historical groups that have come under that heading of family cults. But there are many, many different types of cults. So if most people think there are only religious cults, but there are all shapes and sizes, many different facades that totalitarian leaders work through to pull you in. And I think of the belief system of the group as really like a mask, a facade, because they'll tell you, we're about the Bible, we're about politics, we're about exercise, we're about self-help seminars. But really, they're all about control, and they're all about exploiting people and exploiting their vulnerabilities. So it isn't about what they believe. It's about how they behave and how their behavior affects people.
Have you heard of I know you probably haven't, but you may have. It's a reality show called Welcome to Plathville.
No, I haven't heard of that.
You should watch this. I'm going to show you just a quick picture of it. It's a family, and I would say this was a family cult. It's on TLC, and I was surprised when I watched this because they have like 9 children, and you can tell they're all, blondes and, good-looking kids, but they were denied, TV, computers, music, food, just everything was religion until the kids started graduating, and then they started dating people outside of their family, and of course, hopefully outside their family, but also in religion, but a little more open. And then to see some of these kids rebel against both their parents, against the way they were grown up and the religion, and questioning the religion itself. So I was like, man, this is a cult right in front of our eyes that they made into a reality show, because the parents had control over everything and even tried to control them after they left the nest. So
that might fit the profile. What you look at with a family cult is typically there's one parent who's in charge. It could be the mother, it could be the father, and the other one reinforces that parent. Mm-hmm. And the children never grow up.
Right.
They can't grow up in the sense of becoming independent and making their own life. The family wants to control them from cradle to grave. And so you see that the family is socially isolated. They're not interacting. They're homeschooling.
That was homeschooled.
Not because they're not because of the fact that they think that they can do a better job educating their children, so much as controlling the environment, which is the foundational necessary ingredient of what is called thought reform. There's a book on it. It's called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism by Robert J. Lifton. And in the 22nd chapter, Lifton offers 8 core criteria to determine whether what you're involved in is a thought reform program or just something relatively benign. And Lifton says if 6 of the 8 criteria are evident, whether they say it or not, they're running a thought reform program. And the foundational piece that everything is built on is called milieu control, or control of the environment. So that's when we see a group that has a cult compound, that is a very clear expression of milieu control. Marshall Applewhite had them all in the mansion. They couldn't go anywhere without being escorted. Jim Jones took the people from San Francisco and transplanted them into an isolated jungle compound in English-speaking Guyana. And he controlled everything they read, everything they heard, everything that was social interaction. It was all people that were followers of Jones that populated their little compound that was named appropriately Jonestown. So if you can control everything that a person sees and hears and who they're talking to the degree that you can, you're controlling everything that goes into their mind. And then you can control the mind itself. This is what has been established in a number of, research experiments, like the famous prison experiment that was done by Philip Zimbardo at Stanford University, or other experiments I could cite, which show that we really depend on feedback from people around us to determine what is real, what is not real, and what, in fact, we should do. And another book for your listeners would be Influence by Robert Cialdini. In that book, Cialdini, a professor at ASU, establishes 6 principles of influence that can be used for good or bad. And one of them that would be lock in with Lifton's milieu control would be social proof. And that's when we look around us to see what everybody else is doing to determine what we should do. Queue up at the line, which way to the bathroom, whether or not we should give a standing ovation. So if a cult leader is controlling the social environment, they can create a false social proof, and that can mislead people.
I want to ask, because somebody in the chat room brought this up. So Mark in the chat room said, generally speaking, do you find people to deprogram, meaning do you seek out people to deprogram, or is that family members, or do you reach out, or do they reach out to you for help? And do you need to show people what it's like on the outside of the cult? But most of these people have seen what it's like on the outside of the cult, and they were looking for something different, I'm sure. Or are they already searching for help?
Typically, it could be the adult children of a parent who the adult children are worried about. It could be a spouse worried about her husband, his wife. Most often, it's parents worried about adult children, sometimes minor children. So all I do, Tony, is I answer the phone or I respond to email.
Right.
And typically someone will reach out to me and they'll say, look, I really think I've got a problem here. And I'm going to tell you, about half the time I'm saying to them, no, there's not a problem. It isn't really a cult. You're overreacting. Calm down, chill. It's not that bad. You have maybe misread the situation, or you have confused the name of this group with another group. But about half the time, they're right. And they're telling me things like, oh, my daughter is becoming totally isolated. And this is increasingly the storyline. They were recruited online. They were looking for information about something they were interested in, and the algorithm brought them results. And some of those results were from specious groups or sources, and then they pursued that, and the algorithm gave them more. Or they were recruited on Facebook. They watched a video on YouTube, and then they got involved in a Facebook group, or they started following people on Twitter, and they started giving money through PayPal, and here we go. And the new form of destructive cults is that they're online, and that you can cocoon yourself online and create a kind of echo chamber from who you friend, who you follow, and what you listen to and watch. And I was like back in the Stone Age of the internet. In 1996, I launched culteducation.com, which is a huge database of information about controversial groups and movements. But at that time that I launched it, I thought, this is it. The end of cults. Right. The internet will give people free information, and they will be able to just Google, or back in the day, use Yahoo as a search engine, and they will find this information or more information from other sources and recognize that they're being had.
It actually made it worse, probably.
It made it worse, in my opinion. So I get a call from a family. Parent says to me, my daughter was recruited online. She's obsessed. Now she's Zooming and Skyping all the time. She's becoming very isolated, withdrawing from the family, from her old friends, changing her career path, changing her educational path. I need help. I think she's losing her ability to think critically and independently. And she's becoming dependent upon this new group and leader to think for her. And these are not good choices she's making. And I hear this about...
But how do you, okay, let's say that she's not making good choices, but she's an adult. How do you even approach her? Because, I mean, if she finds out her parents sent you, I mean, that's going to make her even more angry, or even dig into the cult even more. So how do you approach that?
Well, in my book, I detail this,
Oh, okay.
and I offer case vignettes of how it actually plays out in very fine detail, so people can understand the intervention process, which is essentially education. But I'll admit it starts as a surprise, because if you told the person that I'm going to meet with, they're not going to show up,
Right.
or they're going to say, wait a minute, I need to text my friends in the group or my leader and say, what should I do? And they're not going to say, oh, that's great, go and hang out with your parents and this deprogrammer. No. So it starts as a surprise, but I depend on the goodwill of the person that I'm working with to stay and listen. And they may walk out. About 25 to 30% of the people that I sit down with will leave in the first day and a half. So if they stay, we're going to work together for probably 3 days. Though the one woman that I just worked with recently only took 2. I guess that's what Harvard does for you. If you get a Harvard undergraduate degree and Occult gets you, you can think your way out in less time. So she did. And she just basically was listening. And her attitude was, look, if what I'm into is good, it will withstand scrutiny. And if it's not, probably I should hear about it. And by the way, I love my parents, and they want me to talk to this guy. So I'm going to share and talk with him. And during the time I talk with people, we're going to cover 4 basic areas of discussion. One is defining a destructive cult. How do you define it, as I did previously? And does that coincide with the attributes of my group? Number 2, is my group running a thought reform program? What is thought reform? What is coercive persuasion? What are these influence techniques and tricks that groups use? Do I recall such things happening to me? Number 3, what about the group do I not know that I should know if I'm going to continue? Are they hiding stuff from me? What are they hiding? And then finally, why are my mom and dad or a spouse or my kids so worried about me?
Right.
What has happened in my life in the last year, 2 years, whatever, that makes them worry? I mean, Tony, a couple of times I'm sitting with someone who's a diabetic, and they're saying to me, I don't need insulin anymore. The cult told me, well, they won't say the cult. They'll say XYZ group, and the leader told me all I need to do is meditate, or all I need to do is exercise a certain way. And even though I'm diabetic and I should be taking insulin, I don't need it anymore. And this one young man I met in Europe had stopped taking insulin and had been hospitalized, almost died 3 times.
Wow.
He was in his 30s. He had a young daughter, a loving wife, and his family was saying to him, please listen to this guy, because we're worried you're going to die. And so sometimes when an intervention occurs, it is a matter of life or death.
Well, I mean, if you think, I remember the Tom Cruise arguing with Matt, what's his name, about
Matt Lauer.
Lauer about the medication that Brooke Shields, took.
Well,
and so,
well, let's look at Tom Cruise. 3 divorces and counting. And all 3 of them reportedly have to do with Scientology. Wife number 1, Mimi Rogers, who brought him into Scientology. When her parents left, she wanted to leave. Divorce number 1. Divorce number 2, Nicole Kidman. They're married. She manages to kind of get him away from Scientology. And then David Miscavige, the absolute leader, they call him chairman of the board, COB, he decides to send his little quisling, Marty Rathbun, who was a high-ranking member of Scientology, to go nail Tom Cruise and bring him back in. And he becomes gung-ho. End of marriage number 2.
Right.
And the beginning of making outrageous statements when he was supposed to be promoting the film War of the Worlds. I guarantee you Steven Spielberg was not happy with it.
I'm sure.
and then comes Katie Holmes. And Katie Holmes, that marriage doesn't last that long. And she starts having doubts about Scientology. She's starting to realize, well, wait a minute, he educated his 2 adopted children with Nicole Kidman in one of those Delphi schools, and they became fanatical, and they basically don't have that good of a relationship with their mom. And then she's got her child, Suri, her daughter, Suri Cruz.
Right.
And she's thinking, is he going to send Suri to the Delphi school? What is he going to do? Am I going to end up like Nicole Kidman? And lucky for Katie Holmes, her father is a divorce lawyer. And so
I didn't know that.
Yeah, she strategized that divorce, and Tom Cruise ended up making a settlement very quickly rather than going through the court system in New York, which was not going to work for him. And Katie Holmes, she doesn't talk about Scientology, and she really doesn't talk about Tom Cruise. But he reportedly has not seen his daughter very much at all since the divorce. Why? Because Scientology says that if someone is opposed, is critical of Scientology, or leaves, they are very likely a suppressive person, an SP. And if someone is close to an SP, they might be what Scientology calls a PTS, a potential trouble source. So Tom Cruise doesn't want to hang out with Suri, probably because she's a PTS and her mother is an SP. And so Tom Cruise, brilliant actor, has had a wonderful career, arguably the greatest movie star in the world. But when it comes to his private and personal life and marriage, I mean, some people would say 3 strikes and you're out.
Right. Well, I want to ask you this, because I'm sure you've done the research. L. Ron Hubbard and David McCavish, how do you say his last name? Miscavige. We talked about usually when the lead snake gets his head cut off or dies, it kind of disbands or, kind of fizzles out. But this seems to be even, I don't know about as more powerful, but because they've had so many, bad press, but it seems to be going pretty strong. So what's the difference between the two that kept Scientology going?
David Miscavige. I mean, Miscavige was, he was in a position of authority. He was like a gatekeeper for L. Ron Hubbard. L. Ron Hubbard died in 1986, and he left an estate of $600 million to Scientology, pretty much. And even though his family outlived him, David Miscavige successfully bumped them out, and he took over. And he was the secretary, the gatekeeper. Hubbard, who died in really kind of an obscure way. I mean, he was on this ranch where no one could ever really access him other than Miscavige and a select few. And some people think he had Alzheimer's. Others think he suffered from psychosis, but he didn't do interviews. And he was isolated. And David Miscavige knew this was an opportunity. And in his 20s, he became the undisputed totalitarian dictator of Scientology, which is now worth billions of dollars. Right. Some say the value of Scientology is at least $3 billion. There have been reports that $1 billion of it is in cold cash. And they own real estate and everything. But I would say this, that Scientology actually peaked probably under L. Ron Hubbard, who was, after all, the originator of Dianetics and all the things that they believe. And Miscavige, even though he was successful in getting them tax-exempt status in the United States through a litany of lawsuits against the Internal Revenue Service, I think the IRS just said, please go away.
Right.
We don't want you anymore.
Right.
Speaking as somebody who's dealt face to face with Scientology lawyers and how nasty they can be, I can well understand it. And so Miscavige has that feather in his cap. He can say, look, I got a tax-exempt status. And he eliminated the competition. He became the all-powerful leader. And he can be charismatic in his presentations. And he's very, very much an object of worship and the defining element and the driving force of Scientology today. So in certain situations, when a leader dies, if someone else can jump right in and pick up the baton and run, and David Miscavige did that very effectively. He's a very intelligent, very Machiavellian kind of individual who knows how to get rid of people, kind of Stalin-esque, before they become a threat. So he's constantly looking around. I don't know how he lives like that.
I know that would be exhausting.
Going, who could threaten me? Who could threaten me? And then he sees somebody and he goes, oh, get that one. Send him to. They have an actual kind of prison.
Really?
That Scientology runs.
Is it up in the mountains?
No, it's on the outskirts of Los Angeles in Hemet.
Oh, you know, what's funny is I kind of like to gamble once in a while, and I drive past it when I go to the casino once in a while.
Have you ever noticed the fences?
Oh, yeah. No, they also, don't they shoot a lot of their filming there?
Yeah, that's Golden Era Studios. And also, if you look very closely, you'll see a lot of surveillance cameras.
Yeah, tons.
And if you hang out on the perimeter, before long, somebody's going to talk to you. They're going to come out and they're going to say, hey, who are you? What are you doing here? And so they've got people that are in what they call RPF, Rehabilitation Project Force.
Wow.
That are basically prisoners of Scientology. Some people that have left have called it, I escaped from Hemet. I escaped from that facility. But in a sense, they're mental prisoners because they're so indoctrinated that they cannot imagine not complying with their captors. So you have people like Heber Jensch, who has been at RPF for many years. He's the former president of Scientology.
Oh, wow.
And so there are various high-ranking people that will be put there by David Miscavige. And I think their crime is actually being a viable alternative to David Miscavige. That they grew up in Scientology, that they understand what they call the technology, and that they might be a viable alternative to the harsh rule of David Miscavige, who, in my mind, I would say, in my opinion, I think he's worse than L. Ron Hubbard. I think that he's harsher than L. Ron Hubbard. I mean, there have been reports of him physically beating people up, and that person cannot strike him, cannot touch him, because he is the chairman of the board.
Sounds like a mob. The mob.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like, I can kick you,
but
I can hit you, but you can't touch me because I'm COB. And so people have been bullied by him, reportedly beaten by him, though Scientology says, oh, that's all a lie. It's a lie. Never happened. But that is one of the most wealthy and well-connected groups called cults in the world. I mean, Scientology has facilities stretching around the globe. Facilities that are worth millions and millions of dollars. And of course, in LA and Hollywood,
I went to the Celebrity Center. I've been there before.
Oh, yeah. You know, I mean,
was creepy.
I understand they have a great brunch.
I went there for an event. I didn't go to the brunch, but it is creepy because they give it to you for free, the facility for free, but they have to have a presentation before your event, and having people just standing and having this, it's that there's a look to me. I always say there's a look on people's faces when they're in cults. Yeah, that look. You're like,
hi,
yeah.
Tony. How are you?
Yeah. And
I'm fine.
Creepy.
Feeling great. I'm just great.
Right.
Great.
But yeah. Well,
but here's the thing, Tony. You go to the Celebrity Center or you go into what's called an org, a building, a branch of Scientology, and you see all these busy bees, or you see a few.
Right.
Those are the members of what is called Sea Organization, SEA, because Hubbard was at one time in the United States Navy, and they used to call him the Commodore, though he never reached that rank. He was an officer. And so there are 5,000 of these people. They sign what are called billion-year contracts they're obligated to Scientology in this life and in future lives. Scientologists believe in reincarnation. Right. And so they are working for basically room and board. They might get a small allowance. If they'd leave basically with the clothes on their back, maybe some things they threw into a toiletry bag and a suitcase, but no money. Health insurance, forget about it. Retirement, I don't know about that. Just really long hours, working. And there are thousands of people that are in Sea Organization that, in my mind, are like slave labor for Scientology. And many of them were raised in Scientology, pushed into these schools by their parents, run by Scientology. And I mean, inside their mind, they cannot hold an opposing view or idea contrary to Scientology. They're so intensely indoctrinated. And then they're encouraged to become members of Sea Org. You won't see Tom Cruise's kids
doing that.
Connor Cruise is deep sea fishing, and he's a barbecue entrepreneur supposedly. And then Isabella Cruise has an art business or whatever in London. So they're not in Sea Org, but many children of Scientologists are in Sea Org, and it's a tough life. It's really tough.
Well, what's the common denominator when it comes to these cult leaders? Like sociopaths, or I mean, how do you define that as on the psychology part of it?
I once asked a clinical psychologist a very famous cult expert from the 20th century, Margaret Singer. She was it. She counseled Patty Hearst, who was kidnapped by a political cult called the SLA. She worked with more than 1,000 former cult members in her counseling practice, and she appeared frequently as an expert witness in court cases. And I was dealing with David Koresh, and I was thinking to myself, is he or is he not a psychopath? And I posed that question to Margaret Singer, and she said, Rick, they're all psychopaths. And I have come to realize that at a bare minimum, most cult leaders are sociopaths because they have no sense of right or wrong. Right. In their mind, what's good for them is what's right, and what's bad for them is what's wrong. And it's all transactional. And most of them are what you would regard as bare minimum narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, or as many describe them, malignant narcissists and psychopaths, which is really a sociopath kind of on steroids who becomes violent. So are they normal? No. And are they frequently categorized as having some type of mental illness? Yes. Marshall Applewhite, as I said previously, he was in and out of mental institutions for years. L. Ron Hubbard, as part of his military record, there were psychiatric evaluations and discussion about his mental stability as an officer in the Navy. So I think that really part of the job the job description or requirement to be a cult leader is that you really are a sociopath. You're not really concerned how you affect people, if you hurt people. And some of these cult leaders, like Keith Raniere, he was abusing other children when he was 10. He was trying to control people, terrorize little girls when he was 10 years old.
Wow.
And so the question arises, is it nature or nurture?
Yeah.
Are cult leaders hardwired? Are they born that way? Charles Manson and David Koresh had very troubled childhoods. Jim Jones, not so much. Seemed like his family wasn't that bad. But was he a psychopath? I think so. I think pretty much mental health professionals who have looked at his history would say, yeah, Jim Jones was a psychopath. And certainly Charlie Manson was, despite he might have been made to be a psychopath because of his being raised in juvenile facilities. He was a professional prisoner. I mean, that's where he learned many of the manipulative techniques that he learned. Charlie Manson was a very little guy.
Yeah, he was. He's short.
But he could project his power in ways that were not physical. He was a savant when it came to manipulation.
He wasn't a cult leader, but I can see, like, look at Prince. Very short, everybody loved him, but he had such an influence over people with his music. I could see where people, if he wanted to be somebody that wanted to be a cult leader, he would definitely have a following, but, he didn't have that traits of a sociopath or a psychopath. But, it's that he was a small guy that people just flocked to. So,
But he died alone in his house in the elevator. Overdosing on fentanyl.
Right.
And that was a sad story.
Oh my God.
He was in a lot of pain. Prince had, I think, 2 hip replacements, and he ended up on painkillers, and that led him as a gateway drug into what eventually became his undoing, which was fentanyl and all kinds of prescription drugs.
That was sad.
And if he had a cult following, where were they? I
didn't think he was, but I'm just saying that I can see where people, that they don't have to have a tall, strong, stature of a person, because, he was just that type of person. He was small, but he was mighty with his music. And so I can see where Charles Manson, he was small, but like you said, he was mighty with his words, and people flocked to him for that reason. So,
well, and I think that a cult can be benign. For example, the Grateful Dead,
right?
Jerry Garcia. I mean, there were all these people that would go from one venue for concerts to another, following the Grateful Dead. I mean, Jerry Garcia had a perpetual audience of fans that would just do anything to follow the Grateful Dead. And he made a great deal of money from them, but he did not hurt them.
Right.
He did not exploit them, other than, okay, pay for your tickets, and hey, I've got some merchandise that I'd like you to buy, T-shirts, coffee mugs, etc. And he became very rich, and the Grateful Dead were wealthy, but that kind of a cult following, I see that as a benign cult. And so you can have a benign cult. And of course, stars like Prince, Elvis.
Elvis same way.
Had cult followings of people that just absolutely loved them.
Right.
I mean, there at one time, there probably still is, a church of Elvis.
Oh, I'm sure there is somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, they thought of him like a messianic figure. But Elvis himself was really kind of, from what I have read, rather shy. And he wasn't really interested in controlling people. And he was very generous to a fault. He would buy cars for people, help them, as I think Prince did. And so not the mentality or the selfishness or the obsessive me of a cult leader.
Rick, thank you so much. You're such a world of knowledge and sharing your almost 40 years now of.
It's been 40 years, Tom.
82 to now. I'm like, oh my gosh, and it's funny, you're only 38, so that's pretty good. But
well, I'll tell you what, I'm not using a filter.
There you go. I'm using 4.
What you see is what you get. I'm not filtering my persona.
Well, I'm using 4 of them, so no, just kidding. Well, how do people find more about you? Any lectures coming up, book signings, anything? Where do people go?
Well, I will be appearing, I think, on HBO in the series The Vow.
Can't wait.
And they can find me on Netflix in a series called Holy Hell. I appear briefly in that. They can also see me on Stars on the series Seduced.
Wow.
I've done over 30 documentaries, and many of them are online, and they're available streaming through Netflix or another streaming service. But they can also follow me on Twitter. I'm Rick Allan Ross on Twitter, and Facebook. The Cult Education Institute has an institutional Facebook page. They can find me at culteducation.com. And by all means, read my book, which is called Cults Inside Out. And not only does it have a history of modern cults that gives you a sense of where we're at, where we're coming from, but it also gets into an entire chapter on the tricks that they use called cult brainwashing, in quotes, and then defining a destructive cult, a whole chapter about that, and a chapter about recovery and people who have recovered talking through what I've quoted in the book to show there is, something on the other side. There is hope.
That's great.
You can leave a group and recover.
I love that. And so never give up. And if anything, reach out to someone like Rick. And hopefully they can help you get back to living your own life. Don't listen to somebody like Charles Manson. Well, yeah. Thank you so much, Rick. And everybody, thank you for tuning in. We really appreciate it. If you have any other questions, please reach out to Rick. Maybe he has some answers for your questions. And you can always follow me right here on the YouTube channel. You could subscribe, leave a comment, and share this show for people that might be interested in this topic. And make sure you watch Robert Hensley every Monday at 3 o'clock for MINUTEMAN Report, and Bonnie Burkert with the Truth Be Told Transformation. And, of course, me every Friday right here on YouTube. And until next time, I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Bye-bye. This has been another episode of Truth Be Told. Thank you so much for watching. Recorded live at UBN Go Studios in Burbank, California. Join us on social media. Facebook, Truth Be Told Radio. Instagram, Truth Be Told Paranormal. Go to Truth Be Told Worldwide for more information on upcoming shows.